Welcome to Everyday Enlightenment. I'm your host, Patty Teal. My guest today is Father Sheehan, who has been involved with contemplative outreach founded by Thomas Keating since 1983. During that time, he has led many centering prayer workshops and retreats in different parts of the country. Father Sheehan has a master's degree in Formative Spirituality from Duquesne University in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Welcome, Bill.
Oh, thank you, Patty. It's great to have this conversation with you, and I'm looking forward to meeting you in Sedona.
Oh, I'm looking forward to meeting you too. And I wanted to also tell our guests that you're coming to Sedona Mago Retreat in Sedona, Arizona, March 31st through the April 2nd to put on a retreat on centering prayer.
Yeah, and this particular retreat, as you know, is focused specifically for folks in recovery, working the 12 steps, one or other of the addictions that are enveloped in the 12-step process. The beauty of this particular retreat is that it's geared to folks in recovery who are at that point in their recovery where they really desire to deepen their relationship with their higher power. And one of the ways that we suggest that they can do this and kind of lead them through that experience is through a Christian contemplative practice. It's not the only practice, but this contemplative Christian practice that we simply describe as centering prayer. Centering prayer has a long history in the mystical component of Christian spirituality. And if you were to look for a particular source, you would want to look at the 14th century spiritual classic entitled The Cloud of Unknowing. But it's a fabulous weekend, and I'm certainly looking forward to being with the folks.
Oh, it sounds wonderful. So can you describe a little more what centering prayer is?
The centering prayer is a contemplative spiritual practice that primarily is seeking to help us deepen in our relationship, again, with our higher power, however you choose to name or identify that higher power. And with the beauty, at least in my own experience over these many years, the beauty in the practice of centering prayer is, first of all, the emphasis that it places upon our intention. And so you might begin to ask yourself, well, what is our intention, or what is my intention when I take the time to sit and center? And my intention primarily is to consent to the love, to the presence, and to the action of my higher power, of our higher power, that is always closer to us than we are to ourselves. And so the primacy of intention really holds the honor of first place. And then to see the relationship between the symbol of your intention, for example, what we describe as a sacred word like Lord or love or peace or joy, just a simple word that represents your intention or your desire to consent. And then the heart of the practice is to see the relationship between the symbol of your consent and the handling of all thought. The human faculties, or our egoic operating system, is very, very active. You know, we're always thinking and imaging and always running 2 or 3 steps ahead of ourselves. It's just the human condition. But in this particular prayer form, what is suggested is that any time you become aware that one or other of your thoughts is developing what we describe as emotional commentary, we simply encourage you to gently let go, yield, surrender, and then return ever so gently to the symbol of your consent. And then we encourage you to embrace that practice, possibly 20 minutes, a couple of times a day. That would be the commitment to the 11th step. And then also to see that in this particular prayer form, unlike other forms of contemplation, it's very, very receptive. It's not concentrative or heavily focused. And so the beauty of receptivity in this particular way of being in the presence of a higher power is that it frees us up to receive in order to consent. So it's a very beautiful form of prayer that helps us in our healing process. We can say more about that, but that would be, just a very brief way that I describe experientially the practice.
Wow, you really described it beautifully. And it's probably a hard thing to describe because it's almost beyond thought, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and that's very delicate, Patty. It is beyond thought, but not in a way that would do any violence to thought, because thoughts come, thoughts go, and the idea is to be aware that even, and most especially during this period of centering prayer, you're still going to be receiving, on the level of ego, a lot of thoughts, insights, and the discipline, if you will, the very healthy psychological discipline is to be free enough to let go. And then in the letting go, that capacity to let go is deepened simply through our willingness to return to the symbol of our consent. And every time we return to the symbol of our consent, we're really consenting to the love and to the presence and to this action of our higher power that only seeks to heal and to make whole. I think in recovery, we certainly become ever more aware, particularly in sobriety, that we still carry a lot of wounds that cry out for healing. And this is one of the great fruits of centering prayer, the healing component in the prayer. It's just wonderful.
Oh, that's beautifully said again. Now, you mentioned a sacred word that represents your intention. Did I get that right?
That's correct. That's absolutely correct, yeah. What I'd say about that, or to amplify that, I'm suggesting that the importance of centering prayer is your intention, is your desire to consent to the presence of your higher power, rooted and grounded within the depths of your own heart. What's very helpful is to have a symbol of our intention. What would symbolize my intention or your intention if we were going to embrace this particular prayer form? Well, we simply suggest, in the initiation, just have available, we call it a sacred word, but the word itself does not necessarily have to be sacred. What is sacred about the word is what it represents for you, and it represents your desire to consent to the love, to the presence, to the action of your higher power. So any word, I suggested a few, a word like, if you come out of the Christian path, you might want a word like Jesus or Lord. If you're coming out of another faith tradition or no tradition, you would have a word like peace or love or joy or gratitude. The word itself simply is important because of what it represents for you. Yeah.
Now, is that word said aloud, or is it something you're thinking about as you sit quietly and try to receive? I guess try is not the right word. You just allow.
Great. No, there's no thinking about the word in that sense, because that would just activate thoughts or activate the ego. The word is simply recalled, or you return to the word interiorly repeating the word whenever you become aware that the ego is drawing you back into its grasp, so to speak.
So it's a little bit of a tool, similar to what they use in meditation when they say the monkey mind is just taking over and these thoughts are coming, you return to the word.
That's right. And in other traditions, it might be the breath, or it might be another form of just moving you out of that monkey mind turmoil, really, the bouncing back and forth and back and forth. And so any of the spiritual practices, whether it be the East or the West, one of the great fruits of those practices, and I certainly would include centering prayer, even though it is more receptive than some of the other, not so much more traditional, but other forms of meditation or contemplation, is each time, for example, you choose to return to the symbol of your consent, you're quieting down the monkey mind. Because you're not paying attention to it, consciously paying attention to it. You're kind of letting it be, by gently returning to the symbol of your consent. And, over kind of long-term practice, what I love to describe is that it's simply giving the ego a much-deserved rest.
No, that's beautifully said. In fact, you are extremely articulate. I like the gentle factor of it, too. You're not angry at yourself because your mind is thinking about dinner or something else. You just gently come back to that word that represents your intention. So very gentle.
Just to add, that's a beautiful way that you describe that. In amplifying on that, it would be simply you return ever so gently to the symbol of your consent. What we encourage people, particularly those who may be beginners, I would say, you never judge the quality of a particular time of prayer, your 20-minute sit, through its psychological content. The important point is your willingness to commit yourself to the process. So right from the get-go, we encourage people, because of the human condition, we encourage people to assume a friendly attitude toward all thought. Mm-hmm. Thoughts come, thoughts go, that type of thing,
Yeah. Now, you mentioned in your description earlier that this is part of the 11th step, and I'm really not familiar with all the steps as someone who has been through recovery might be. What is the 11th step?
The beautiful part of the 11th step is that it simply suggests to the folks that are working the program, working the process of the 12-step program, which for people in recovery, it is not only the royal road to freedom, but it's a way of life. But you go through the process and go through each of the steps, and most often you're working with a sponsor that you're in contact with. So then in the process of recovery, embracing the 12 steps, you come to that point in your recovery where something deep within you wants to explore more experientially my relationship or their relationship with their higher power, however they choose to name that. Again, you can talk about the Christian tradition, and we might say, well, we would name that higher power as God or Jesus. But for those that are from other faith traditions, they may not choose to name their higher power in that particular way, but they're still feeling very drawn to experience a relationship that takes them really beyond the human tendency towards self-absorption.
So it sounds as though, even though you come from, of course, a very strong Christian background, in fact, you're a priest, but it sounds like you're welcome to everyone and whatever they believe at this upcoming retreat. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. I would say, certainly through my own relationship to the Catholic Church and my ordination, and that's been 52 years, so I'm very, very deeply grounded in this tradition. I must say, as I get older, it's because of my groundedness in this tradition that everything within me wants to simply reach out and continue to communicate to whomever. Everyone is welcome to participate in a retreat in the manner in which it's being described at Sedona Mago, and everyone is welcomed. I think whatever tradition you're coming from, there comes that point in your recovery or in your life where you feel that desire for God knows what. And it's that deeper desire that something like centering prayer speaks to and seeks to satiate. It just seems when people in recovery come to that point, it just opens up so much in terms of their own lives. Patty, let me just say this, just so there's no confusion. I'm not either in recovery in that formal sense, invited to participate in these 11-step retreats primarily through my experience with centering prayer. But I have to tell you, they're the most powerful weekend that I've experienced after many years of retreat ministry. I just want to put that in there. You can edit it or cut it out, but just for your own information.
Yeah, thank you. So the upcoming retreat at Sedona Mago Retreat is March 31st through April 2nd. And so that's a Friday, and it's just really throughout the weekend. And then it ends on Sunday, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah,
That's correct.
and so hopefully, even if you have a 9-to-5 job, that you could make time to come to this. It sounds absolutely wonderful. Can you kind of give an idea of the timeline of the retreat and what people would expect to do if they should decide to come to this?
No, I'm just part of the overall team. Some of the folks that are very much involved in recovery and in the 12 steps are really organizing in terms of the daily schedule. But my experience of having participated in a number of 11-step retreats is, for example, as you mentioned, you'll come in Friday to this beautiful retreat setting and get settled and have a little time. I would imagine the first event would be a meal, an evening meal, and then we'd get together Friday evening just to give an overall orientation of the flow of the weekend, have a chance to check in with everyone kind of, letting us know who they are and why they may be taking the time to spend this weekend with us. That's just that type of informal, but very deep orientation. And then at least in the retreats the 11-step retreats that I've participated in, they usually will have a meeting, 12-step meeting after the orientation, and then people would retire and go to bed. On Saturday, before breakfast, we'd have an opportunity to experience the centering prayer. We'd begin the day with a period of probably a 20 or a 30-minute period of centering. And by the way, on that Friday night, for people that have had no experience with centering prayer, again, this is not an obstacle because part of the team would be prepared to give them a very brief orientation so that they don't feel as though they're on the outside looking in and immediately be drawn into the whole process. So after the prayer on Saturday morning, then we'd have breakfast, and then we'd have a gathering probably at 9:30 for some type of conceptual input around a particular subject. Now, I haven't seen the schedule, so I can't speak specifically.
Right.
Really trying to focus on other spiritual practices that, again, just simply help the overall recovery process. And then probably before lunch, we'd have another period of prayer. We'd have lunch. And then there's usually a little time to rest in the afternoon. And the team members, including myself, would be available to meet on a one-to-one with anyone that might find that kind of time helpful. And then probably 3:30 would come together for another period of prayer. And then there would be a little more input, an afternoon conference, if you will, around whatever subject that we're focusing on. I believe it's 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon. There's going to be an optional Catholic Eucharist, optional, but everyone is welcome. And for those that may not feel as though they wish to participate in that liturgy, there'll be an opportunity, at least in previous retreats, I've usually had some experience of yoga or some moving experiences. So that gives people that kind of freedom of choice. And then we have, again, judging from the past, that would be a talking meal. I forgot to mention the breakfast meal and the lunch meal on Saturday would more than likely be in silence. And we're going to really encourage a climate or an attitude of silence during the retreat. But then there's the talking at the evening meal on Saturday, and then there may be a couple of things Saturday night, but one thing Saturday night for sure would be another 12-step meeting. And then Sunday morning, again, we'd meet for prayer, for breakfast, and then there'd be a session in the morning, again, around whatever the subject the team has decided to explore, and then lunch, and then we're off to the four corners of the earth.
Oh, that says beautifully described retreat. I want to come. I wanted to ask you a couple things. First of all, why is it important to have these periods of silence, for instance, when you're eating?
Let me tell you something, Father Thomas Keating, my mentor, who really founded contemplative outreach. He's a Trappist monk who lives out in St. Benedict's in Snowmass, Colorado. He's going to be 94 on March the 7th, and thank God, still doing very, very well. But Father Thomas would say, silence is God's first language, and everything else is a poor translation. Just given the high energy that we put into most of our lives, and an awful lot of that emanating out of the ego, that we're just stretched. And we're so caught up, either ruminating about the past or projecting into the not yet future, we're very, very seldom really present in the moment. And so silence and solitude just help to kind of quiet us down so that we go deeper, so that we go beneath the egoic operating system and become very much aware, as Cynthia Bourgeois would say, we have another operating system, and that operating system is identified with the heart. So it's finding the place of the heart, going deeper, and to live our lives on a deeper level. It's just a very positive way of just encouraging us to quiet down. Just give it a rest.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you for explaining that. I think it's wonderful that the leaders will meet with people one-on-one.
We try to be as available to as many, even if, quote unquote, we run out of time, we'll kind of try to work it out. Mm-hmm. For some, that's a very important part of the experience.
So, Bill, as I mentioned in the introduction, you have a master's degree in formative spirituality. And I'm just wondering, what led you on this whole spiritual path?
Well, to give you a bit of the history, I was ordained priesthood in 1965. Initially desired to go to foreign missions, and I actually was assigned to our mission in Brazil. And then through circumstances with my family, particularly with my dad, who at that time was suffering from acute emphysema, it was suggested to me by my provincial that I stay in the States until my dad passed away, and that from ordination, he died. I was ordained in May of 65, and he died in December of 66. Given that period of time, I also became more involved in the ministry with our seminarians, those men who were preparing for the priesthood. So I became very much involved on the level of spiritual direction and counseling and just trying to accompany them through this process. And then someone said to me, well, you're already doing this, but you really need to get some certification, some professional background. So that's what brought me to Duquesne. And the program that I participated in was a 3-year full-time interdisciplinary program. It took all of the human sciences and really would ask the question, what do the insights of these various human sciences have to say about overall human growth, spiritual growth, development? And so it was an extraordinary experience. 3 years full-time, required a thesis, a rather elaborate thesis, but for me, the point was it was an opportunity to simply look more deeply into myself with the help of people that I really trusted, professional people, psychologists, and spiritual directors. So I was living the experience, and then after that, went back into some years of formation back at our Scholastica in Washington. But that formative spirituality has given me the background for retreat ministry, for spiritual direction, for accompanying people on the path and on the journey. It's been an extraordinary gift for me. It really has. People will say to me, well, when are you going to retire? And I'm saying, from what?
Oh, well, that's like, wonderful. It doesn't feel like work to you.
I'm at a point in my life, what are you doing? Well, I'm hanging out with people who are searching either for God or for their higher power. Does it get any better than that? And so anyway, that's a bit about the formative piece.
Yeah, that's a pretty high purpose that you had and a calling from a very young age, because I don't know how old you are, and I'm not going to ask, but you must have been quite young when you made the decision to go this direction.
No, when I was ordained in 65, I was 28. That was in May, and I would have been 29 in August. By the time I went into this graduate program, which was perfect for me, it was like 5 years after ordination, and it was sort of stepping aside and just taking another whole look at my life, how it was, where I was, how I felt I was being called to move on in terms of growth, not so much in terms of a specific project. It was a pure gift.
Well, you've been a gift to us today. I really thank you so much because I've learned a lot. To have a chance to speak with a priest who has spent his life helping others on the search for a deeper meaning to life is really a wonderful gift. I thank you so much for that. I have a question, since you have so many great answers. Is there a difference really between centering prayer and meditation, or are they one and the same?
Well, it would depend. When you speak to people, and I mean this in a very positive way, to say people that are more involved in Eastern meditation, they would refer to it as meditation. When you talk to someone like myself from a Christian background, we would speak of contemplation. Basically, the forms may be a little different. It's basically the same process. It's moving from the head, our over-identification with the egoic operating system, moving from that over-identification to the deeper level of heart perception, and then to become aware of what's welling up from within the depths of our hearts. And that's where the listening and the paying attention in a good sense, and trusting that process, trusting that interior movement. It's all about experience. I can't say that enough. Even coming out of a very highly organized theological background and a church that places a great deal of emphasis on theology, which is wonderful. But you're looking at what is your experience. Talk to me. That's where the rubber hits the road.
Okay, thank you for explaining that. So before we say goodbye, I want to remind our listeners that you're coming to Sedona Mago Retreat March 31st through April 2nd, and you can go to the webpage on Sedona Mago Retreat and find our specialty programs and go to the recovery series and register for it there. If they have any questions for you, is there a way that they can get a hold of you?
Well, sure, I can give you my email, all small caps, SHEOMI@AOL.com. Actually, I'm a member of a religious community within the Roman Catholic Church, and my religious community, hence the OMI, is Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate. That's an international community that is worldwide on every continent. It's a great, great family.
Could you repeat what that organization is, Bill, because I'm not familiar with it?
Okay. My religious community is the Missionary Oblates of Mary Immaculate.
Okay.
Yeah, OMI, Oblates of Mary Immaculate. An international religious community.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you for taking time to talk to us today. I enjoyed it immensely.
Will I see you on the weekend?
I will try to make it a point. I don't usually work on the weekend.
Please have a cup of coffee.
I would love that. I would love that.
That would be wonderful.
It's always so nice to see people in person after having such a lovely conversation.
Well, I'm glad you enjoyed it. I did likewise.
Okay.
You have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Bye-bye.
You too. Bye.